My name is Colleen Anderson and I'm 34 years old. My parents called me Grandpa's charity case for as long as I can remember. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every family gathering, my mother would say it with that little laugh she thought made it sound like a joke. Well, Colleen's always been Dad's little charity case. My father would smirk and add, someone had to take pity on her. I grew up believing it. I believed I was the burden, the afterthought, the one who only mattered because my grandfather felt sorry for me. The truth was simpler than that, though I didn't know it yet. My grandfather, Walter, was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was worth something. When my parents were too busy chasing their next vacation or their next country club dinner, Walter was the one who showed up. He taught me how to change a tire in his driveway when I was 16. He sat with me for 6 hours in a hospital waiting room the night I had my appendix removed, while my parents were at a wedding in Napa and didn't bother to leave early. He was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every moment my parents couldn't be bothered to notice. My parents, David and Renee, had a different relationship with Walter. They visited him twice a year, usually around holidays, and always seemed more interested in his house and his savings account than in him. I heard them once in his kitchen, arguing quietly about whether the antique clock in his study was worth more appraised or sold as is. Walter had been in the next room. I don't think he heard them. Or maybe he did, and that silence explained more than I understood at the time. 3 weeks ago, Walter passed away in his sleep. He was 81, and the doctors said his heart simply gave out, peacefully without pain. I got the call at 6 in the morning from the hospice nurse, and I remember sitting on my bathroom floor for 20 minutes before I could stand up. He was the closest thing to a real parent I ever had, and now he was gone. The funeral was scheduled for a Thursday. I called my parents the night before to confirm what time they'd be picking me up, since we'd talked about riding together. My mother's voice sounded strange, clipped, like she was in a hurry. She said something had come up, something about a flight, and that they'd try to make it. I didn't understand what could possibly be more important than burying the man who raised half of this family in every way that mattered. They didn't come. I stood at the front of that small church alone, next to an empty pew where my parents were supposed to sit, while people who barely knew Walter offered me their condolences and asked where my mother was. I told them she wasn't feeling well. I didn't know what else to say. That evening, sitting in my car in the church parking lot, still in my black dress, I opened my phone out of habit and saw my mother's post at the top of my feed. My parents skipped my grandpa's funeral. Hours later, they were posting vacation photos from a Caribbean beach, living our best life. There they were, my father in swim trunks holding a drink with a little umbrella in it, my mother in sunglasses, both of them grinning at the camera on a white sand beach while my grandfather's casket was still fresh in the ground 300 miles away. I sat there staring at my phone until my hands went numb. That's when I got a text from my grandpa's phone. My chest tightened before I even opened it, because Walter had been gone for 3 days and his phone had been sitting in an evidence bag with the rest of his belongings, or so I thought. The message read, "Sweetheart, come to my house right now." I stared at those words for a full minute, convinced it was some kind of cruel mistake, maybe a butt dial from the funeral home, maybe someone playing a sick joke. But something in my gut told me I had to go. I drove straight there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire way, replaying every possibility in my mind. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, which it never should have been. The front door was slightly open. I stood there for a long moment before I found the courage to push it the rest of the way and step inside. When I got there, my heart dropped. Sitting at my grandfather's kitchen table in the dim light was a man I had never seen before in my life, holding a manila envelope with my name written across the front in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. The man at the table introduced himself as Harold Ferris, and he said he was my grandfather's attorney of nearly 30 years. He apologized for the scare, explaining that Walter had left very specific instructions to be carried out exactly this way, down to the timing of the text message, which had been scheduled in advance through an app Walter set up months before he died. He said Walter knew, somehow, that this night would matter more than any other night in my life, and he wanted me to be the one standing in this kitchen when the truth came out. Harold slid the manila envelope across the table, and my hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, along with a folder of documents I didn't understand yet. The letter began with my name, and it said things I never expected to read. Walter wrote that he had heard every cruel comment my parents ever made about me, every charity case joke, every dismissive laugh at holiday dinners. He wrote that he stayed quiet for years because he didn't want to create a war inside the family, but that his silence had never meant he agreed. He wrote that I was the only person who ever visited him without asking for anything, the only one who sat with him through chemotherapy 3 years ago that my own parents never even knew about, because I promised him I wouldn't tell them. He said watching me do that, expecting nothing in return, taught him more about loyalty than 60 years of business dealings ever had. Harold explained that Walter had rewritten his will 8 months earlier, in complete secrecy, and that a formal reading would take place in probate court the following week, since my parents had already been notified through their own separate certified letter and were expected to contest it. He said Walter anticipated this, which was why he wanted me prepared beforehand, so I wouldn't be blindsided in that room. The following Tuesday, I sat in a small courtroom that smelled like old paper and coffee, my parents seated across the aisle from me. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father kept adjusting his tie like it was strangling him. The judge asked Harold to read the operative portion of the will aloud for the record, and the room went completely silent. Harold read that Walter was leaving the family lake house, his savings, and the majority of his estate to me, Colleen Anderson, citing years of documented care, presence, and loyalty that he wanted formally recognized in writing. Then came the part that made my mother gasp audibly. Walter had left a single symbolic dollar to David and Renee Anderson, along with a letter to be read into the court record. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, read it herself since Walter had requested it be read by the court and not by his attorney, as if he wanted the weight of an impartial voice behind his words. The letter said that he loved his son and daughter-in-law, and that he forgave them for many things over the years, but that money was not something to be inherited by people who mistake vacations for grief and mistake cruelty for humor. He wrote that calling a granddaughter a charity case for showing up, for caring, for being present, was something he could never reward with silence. He wrote that real family isn't about blood convenience, it's about who sits beside you when it's hardest, and that Colleen had done that more times than either of them ever knew. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor, shouting that this was insane, that the will would be challenged, that Walter wasn't in his right mind. The judge calmly informed him that Walter's mental competency had been independently evaluated and notarized twice in the months before his passing, specifically to prevent exactly this kind of challenge. My mother finally looked at me then, not with anger, but with something that looked almost like shame, though I'll never know for certain what she felt in that moment. I didn't say a single word in that courtroom. I didn't need to. Walter had already said everything I never could, in a way no one could argue with, in front of a judge on the record forever. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade around my family, seen. Not as an obligation, not as a joke, not as someone's charity case, but as someone who mattered enough for an old man to rewrite his entire legacy just to make sure the world knew the truth before he was gone. If this story moved you the way it moved me to write it down, please hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one deserve to be heard, and there are so many more waiting for you on this channel. Your support means everything, and it helps keep these real, raw stories coming every single week. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next story.